Other media approach shows, some of the most informative shows on television right now are billed as comedy. You know them, The Daily Show, Last Week Tonight, Solid 22 Minutes. They shape opinions, that's for sure, but are they reliable news sources? Let's see if we can find out. Joining me, first of all, is the co-host, Scott Colby. Scott is a journalist with 36 years of experience as a reporter, columnist, editor, photographer, designer, as well as a national best-selling author and the creator of the Coach Colby Writing Academy. Visit his website, coachcolby.me, for a free insider's cheat sheet on how to write effective op-eds. But Scott is not a comedian.
And neither is my brother Craig, although some people think he's funny looking. I don't. Craig has spent 37 years in broadcasting. He's an award-winning executive producer and author and owner of Colby Vision, a video production and consulting company. But like we said, Craig is not a comedian. And since I am not a comedian, or neither of us is a comedy A-lister, we brought in a debater, Steve Patterson, the host of CBC Radio's outstanding and long-running show, The Debators. He is our guest today. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you for having me, brothers. And I thought you were going to go to, since he's an A-list, I thought you were going to go to D-list. He's a D-list. So I'm like, either way.
We don't go that low.
Our favorite thing is to bring guests on and immediately insult them.
Well, yeah, it's good.
It goes over really well. Keeps them on their heels.
It wakes them up, I was going to say. Yeah.
So we're going to talk all about news and comedy, and there are big shows for that. On your show, The Debaters, which I love, you use current events more as a jumping off point than, say, deep dives into policy and what people are doing. For you, how much do you rely on politics for comedy?
I mean, the good thing about our show being on, CBC is that people are generally politically aware. They do like going into it, some places more than others. We tape episodes in Ottawa every year, so when I do a show opening there, I got to know exactly what's going on in Canadian politics, because everyone there is into it, and a lot of them work in it, so they want that. But I do think it's really important to know what's going on. You want to touch on it, but also it can be overload. It's especially now. I think that sometimes people are, they're bombarded with messaging so much that you kind of want to. In comedy, you can touch on it, but then you got to bring some actual comedy too.
What do you think? I mean, they've been natural pairs for a long time. What makes news and comedy such good companions?
I think for me personally, it's a way to keep writing every day, because the news changes every day. So, I have read a quote from Jon Stewart saying that it's basically doing current events comedy is like writing a set on toilet paper, because no one's going to care by the next day. But for me, it keeps my mind working on what is going on, and then you'll get some stories that have a long news cycle to them. For instance, tariffs, which I was hoping would not still be in the news every day, but they are. And I've got a bit on tariffs that I thought I would do for one taping, and now we're coming up on the sixth taping of me doing it, and it's still front page news. So it's good to be aware, I think.
Are tariffs inherently funny?
I mean, not to me, I don't think. But I mean, my take on it is that I wish, I have optimism for Prime Minister Carney, but I kind of wish Chrétien was back in, because that's the guy I really want going toe to toe with their guy, and he would have approached it very differently. So some industries are obviously, everyone's kind of wondering what's going on, and some industries are devastated by it. So I'm pretty careful with it. I think it affects all of us, and I don't want to ever do a show that knocks a group that's already been knocked down further. I'd like to take a shot at the people that are making this that unnecessary stuff happen, and that's taking a shot at the powerful, I think, is always better than taking an easy shot at the people who are suffering. So.
If I could just follow this thread for 1 second. Okay, so a lot of comedians, stand-up comedians, they test their material right? You go to a stand-up show, and sometimes they say no phones because they you know they're going to be pushing the limit, pushing the edge, right? And someone like your show and the CBC and news, how do you find where that line is, and do you have a chance to test that before you go into your live shows?
That's a really good question, and I have to answer it honestly because I've been asked this question before, and I've always answered, you don't know where the line is until you cross it, and the crowd the crowd will let you know once you have, and then it's what happens after that that to me makes the strongest comedians is how do you react to the crowd's reaction, and for me, live comedy should be in the moment, and it should be taking into consideration what those in the room are feeling. And if you don't, you could just do the show, to a bedroom, which is what a lot of I think a lot of newer online comics do is they just do a show to a screen with no one on the other side of it. So I'm very conscious of what the people are feeling. And with debaters, we got a pretty big listenership. So I unfortunately can't imagine what all of the listeners are, how they're reacting to it. We try to stay, as in the middle as we can, but we get letters every week from people that are, offended by something that we said because it's point of view comedy. And fortunately, we've been on long enough. I think that they trust we're not doing it from a bad place. We're trying to take shots at all sides, I think is the way that you do it best. We've taken lots of shots at the Conservatives, but we took a lot of shots at Trudeau on the way out as well. So it's we try to keep our arsenal equally dispersed, I guess, which might not be the right choice of words for now either. But.
Yeah, Trudeau took more shots than Bonnie and Clyde put together on his way out. I love that you brought up Jean Chrétien because he had the funniest headline I think I've ever seen, at least on the short list, when he choked that protester in Hull. The headline was Hull Hogan.
Yeah, that was the Ottawa Sun.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
That's pretty good.
Comedy and news shows, they are so popular right now. I can't miss a week of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and Jon Stewart is everywhere. They shape opinions, but are they news shows? Like, how do you classify those shows?
I think they are news shows, and they are where a certain generation literally gets their news. They don't want to take it from a traditional source. They don't even watch television or have cable, as far as I know. A lot of the Gen X generation. So for them, this is their source of news. And John Oliver, especially Last Week Tonight, they do deep dives on things, and they must have an army of researchers and an army of lawyers because they're taking direct shots at people in the news and naming them by name, and they have to be able to back it up. So I absolutely think that those are reliable sources of news that you want to take in a palatable way. And this hour in Canada, I think they do a great job of what they do with sketch. I just wish a Canadian broadcaster would have the guts to do a Canadian version of the Daily Show, because a nightly version of that where we have the Canadian perspective, because that's missing and it's sorely lacking, unfortunately.
Go ahead, Scott.
No, go ahead.
With those shows, how important is that palatability in a time when the news is so dire? I mean, almost any time you can say that, but now we have, right as we're recording this, the President of the United States has sent the National Guard and the Marines into Los Angeles against the will of the governor. The more than a century of good relationship between the United States and Canada is apparently at an end. There's so much bad news. How does comedy make that more palatable to keep people informed?
I mean, I think it's I'd go beyond palatable. It's essential. I mean, it's an old saying, but if you don't laugh, you'll cry. I mean, if you just take everything that's in the news right now and everything the way the world is going, and do deep dives on that with people that look at it from the most dire perspective of what can happen, you probably won't get out of bed. So I think I believe it's more important now than ever to have informed comedy that's actually based on fact and be able to find the humor in it. As I said, taking shots at the people that are obviously the oppressors in the group, the people that have obviously come from a place of power, and taking them down a notch or two is important work as far as I'm concerned. And that should be done. It shouldn't be laughing at people that are suffering for no fault of their own. But absolutely, we should be taking a shot at thin-skinned people with no discernible sense of humor. And I think we all know who we're talking about.
Well, there's clear.
I'm sitting right here, Steve. Come on. I mean,
there's a clear winner in that category, but the category is fully occupied as well.
Yes.
There's more than one of those.
So are you saying
good choice of words too? Fully occupied.
Are you saying that the more dire the circumstances we are in, the more we need news comedy shows to help cope?
I mean, I didn't say it that eloquently, Scott, but yes. I mean, if that's going to be on a poster with my face, yeah, I'll take it. Comedy is more necessary now than ever, and there's so many different ways to get comedy, and so many people that there's no barrier to being a comedian. You turn your camera on once and declare yourself, and that's it. So I think people need to, just as it is with news, they need to seek out reliable comedy, hopefully experienced to some degree, so that it's people that know what they're doing. And but I do think it's more essential now than it's ever been.
But do you run the risk of it being too soon, right? Or do you even care about that? We'll take that risk if we're going to take on a topic that's so fresh and raw.
You guys would probably know this fact because you seem like guys that know facts. But
glad we seem that way.
You seem like that. You've done a great job of that facade. But the attention span of people has come down so much that, and this is the funny part, is this is from a report that might not have been true, but could conceivably be true, is that I believe it's less than that of a goldfish now. So if the human attention span is only lasting for seconds when it used to have lasted for minutes, you've got to get to people quickly, and the news cycle is so much quicker now that literally you need to do it within the day. So I think if it's a well-crafted piece of comedy that is taking aim at the right targets, I think it can be instantaneous. And I've gone through it. If I've logged on to X, formerly known as Twitter, which so many people don't seem to want to roll with, but if I log on to that, and the only reason I am on that is to see what's going on with both sides of the equation. But if I see something breaking on that I want to make a joke about, I look, and the joke has probably already been made if it's even an hour old. So you have to react immediately, I think, from a comedy perspective, if you can.
You talk about the lack of attention span and the depth, and I want to come back to last week tonight with John Oliver, because if my kids ever ask me how to do an essay, and they will never ask me that, even though I'm fully qualified to answer that question,
yeah,
I would point them at John Oliver's, the last 2/3 of the show. They do. There's a desperation for more in-depth journalism, but they do deep dives on what you would think would be incredibly dry topics, yet it works so much. I guess I just don't have a question about that, but I know you watch the show. What are your thoughts on what they're doing with these incredible essays?
Again, that's my go-to. I mean, I like what they do with the Daily, and there's other shows that are out there. Lots of people are trying to do it, but for whatever reason, I've been a fan of John Oliver since before he came to North America. I met him at the Edinburgh Festival when he was. I saw him do a whole show about current events that I didn't even know what he was talking about because it was all UK current events, and I still found him encapsulated, or I don't know what the word is, but he was he was obviously well informed, and this was him without writers. So I think that it's a natural thing to him to do a deep dive, to call people on stuff, and to combine, pretty intellectual topics with then the most base put downs. And then when you combine that and you have someone on graphics to visualize what he just said, I think that they've paced it perfectly on that show. Is that, look, I've been talking about this for a while. Here's a quick shot of that bird from earlier eating that thing. Like they are aware that they're doing it, and they do it in a way that, they're constantly looking for, when can we interrupt ourselves, keep it funny, and then get back to it. So there's a reason that show keeps winning all the awards you can in that category.
Do you think someone like him and Trevor Noah have a license maybe that others don't, because they're outsiders, right? They're not from North America. They're coming in, so they can kind of point out the absurdities as an outsider. And do you find, as a Canadian comedian, that you may or may not have that license, or does it even matter?
That's a great question too. You guys have good questions. It should be called Great Questions with Craig Scott, if you're looking for an image. In my experience of doing comedy in a few different places, I've found that Canadians can immediately laugh at themselves, no matter if it's a Canadian delivering it, for sure, but also others. I find Australians are like that, and I find the Irish, which is my background, they're like that. I find that ironically, the British and the Americans are not usually. They don't want someone coming from another place and making fun of something about them to their face. So it's kind of amazing that John Oliver is accepted like that. And Trevor Noah, they seeked him out on the Daily Show to come as that outsider. So maybe it's just me. Maybe the stuff I was doing they didn't like. But I find that, Canadians laugh at themselves much easier, and I think that's a great quality. Right now, I'm not sure a Canadian could do a show in the States and be laughed at as much. But boy, do we need Canadians standing up for ourselves and making fun of others right now. So
why do you think, for the most part, political comedy leans left?
Because the right have no discernible sense of humor. That's the short answer. They don't find anything they're doing funny about themselves. And if you've ever heard, a right winger have you ever seen a clip of a right winger doing something they think is funny? It is discernibly not. It's not funny. It just violates everything I just said. It's not making fun of themselves. It's making fun of people that were, kind of the powerless as opposed to the powerful. And it's they don't have any sense of humor. And I don't mean to name names, and I know you didn't ask this, but I was on stage doing a show with former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and he wouldn't even look at me in the face because we had made so much fun of him on the Debators. and I was supposed to interview him in the group. He, I'm sure, said to the group, "I'm not going to be interviewed by that guy." And after he was done, I don't think he realized I was emceeing the whole event. So I came up after him and said, "I can't even begin to describe how different that interview would have been if I had done it." And he stared at me with his Vulcan ice eyes from across the room, and I'm like, there's a person with no sense of humor about themselves.
It sounds to me, and these are my words, not yours, like a lack of humanity. Right? I mean, there is some humanity in realizing your own vulnerability and being able to laugh at it. And if you can't, it feels like there's a piece of the puzzle missing like under the couch or in the middle of the floor and sucked up by the vacuum cleaner, and you may never be getting it back.
I mean, it's a pretty specific analogy, but yes.
Yeah, you can.
What kind of vacuum cleaner is it, Craig? Is it a Dyson?
No, it's like a central vac. It's a central vac. So you can probably dig it out downstairs from that big
what
thing.
kind of vacuum cleaner is a funnier vacuum cleaner?
It's a dust buster. Let's brand it.
That's a funnier one.
Yeah.
It's too easy to find. What's off limits in Canadian politics?
Again, I don't think it has to be necessarily Canadian or American or whatever. I just think that's, again, it's not making fun of the oppressed, who are being oppressed through no fault of their own. And, the Canadian military has been a pretty easy target for a long time. But the men and women who serve in the Canadian military are not, shouldn't be made fun of for their circumstances and their lack of resources, which, as we speak, seem to be getting beefed up pretty good. So they're gonna. Who's laughing now, Patterson? But I did a joke once on a comedy special about the Canadian military being called to Toronto to help us clear some snow, and they showed up in forest green camouflage. And I don't want to be an idiot here, guys, but I can see ya was basically my joke, and that to me it's still a good joke, but I kind of delved into it a bit further, and I got a letter directly written by someone who's a family of a military person, and I took that to heart because it's not the people that are serving that should be joked about, it's the circumstances. So now I try to make sure if I'm going to do a bit that I research it well, that I laugh at the situation, and that I give a little disclaimer. I'm like, I admire everyone that serves, but we got to give them the right equipment.
Right. You say that Canadians are pretty good at laughing at themselves. Is there a part of Canada that is more challenged in that aspect? I imagine the Maritimes are pretty good jokers. Is it a tougher crowd in Toronto or Alberta? Who can we throw under the bus?
That's tough. I have done shows everywhere, fortunately, and I'm a pretty good person to ask about this. The real risk you run is that when you do a show out east in Newfoundland, there's a good chance most of that crowd's funnier than you, just with anything that they say. So it's a bit intimidating to do shows out there. And I did, one of the first Newfoundland comedy festivals, and I was on stage with Mark Critch and Sean Majumder, which is basically like doing a Catholic convention with God and Jesus. So it was that wasn't an easy set to get there, but they're a fun-loving people, and if you can give them any excuse to laugh, they'll laugh at it. I think the toughest audiences I've had to face have been, I won't say Vancouver in general, but Vancouver, it kind of moves east to west, and if you do a show on a Vancouver Friday night and there's a guy there and a girl and they're on a date and you make that guy's date laugh, there's a good chance the guy won't. And I don't know, it might be everywhere, but I've found they're a little bit more serious about themselves in BC. But again, we tape Debators in Vancouver all the time, and we have great crowds there. So I don't want to get everybody in BC mad at me now, but I would say the crowd that most wants to laugh are in the East, and they're all great, but east to west, it gets a little bit different.
Right.
Well, you talked about the trouble with the military, and that is a very funny joke. I can see you. I'm going to be laughing about that later. What's gotten you in the most trouble?
I don't know. I don't get. Well, this is funny to me. When I first started hosting the Debaters, we got a letter. This is probably when they stopped sending me letters that people would send in, because, as you might imagine, grammar is very important to CBC radio listeners. So we got a letter that said, I don't know whether Steve Patterson doesn't know the difference between infer and imply, but he used the term infer when he should have used the term, something like that. And so I put
canceled. You're really canceled.
Yeah, that's right. So I put into a script, I don't know whether you're inferring, I don't know how to use imply, or implying, I don't know how to use infer. Either way, I insist you have a sense of humor. And then they stopped sending me those letters. So, that's they're an informed bunch, Debaters fans. And, I just in Toronto not long ago, I did a joke about how, I was going into a Chrétien bit, and I mentioned how old he was, and someone I was off by a year. And someone was like, no, he's this. And I'm like, God, real? Can I just get, who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, well, people love when people on TV are wrong and they can correct them. I'm old enough in TV and they can insult you for it. I'm old enough in TV to be pre-internet at TSN when people would phone and leave messages, and someone would transcribe the messages and leave them for us in the newsroom. And I remember once I was at TSN, Mark Jones was on the air at the time, Michael Landsberg, Jim Van Horn, Paul Romanuk, Gino Retta, and somebody left a note that said, Mark Jones is terrible, and so is the tall guy, the short guy, the guy with the mustache, and the Jewish guy with the blow-dried hair. And Mark Jones read it and said, at least he knew my name.
I agree with that. Yeah, and I mean, Jay and Dan used to do a segment at the end, right? Of like, you blew it, and they would make fun of themselves for a mistake they made earlier in the broadcast. And I think that's the way to empower yourself against that, is to be like, yeah, of course I made a mistake, but
there was a time when I would have been the whole show if they was just you blew it. Behind the scenes, just mistakes that have been made.
So what's the with a live show? What is the biggest challenge with a live show? Is it reacting to what's coming up, or is it just having it well planned? Oh, I can't hear. What happened? I think Steve's.
Can you not hear us, or can we not hear you?
Sounds like Steve's sound went out.
Sounds like we have lost Steve's microphone. Well,
he's pointing to his ears, so maybe he couldn't hear.
The funniest part is Scott asked a question about what can go wrong in a live show.
I know.
While we're live,
guys. Sorry.
And we lost.
Well, we just answered our own question.
Yeah.
Okay. I can hear you guys. The Bluetooth took over another device in my.
Well, oddly enough, the question Scott asked is, what's the hardest part about doing a live show?
That was a very prescient question. I anticipated our live show was about to go in the dumpster.
Well, now there's a train going by in my Junction neighborhood, so now you get to have the real majesty of this place. Yeah, I've never been good with technology. I think I give off some sort of gamma ray that affects live feed. So I hate having control of the technology and trying to speak. So I admire Craig for doing that at the same time.
But I was wondering, like, is it like with a live show? Could it be like, the crowd's like, someone gives an answer that's like, kind of out there. The crowd maybe isn't into it, or is it just not being properly, like, if everything's properly scripted, you can pretty much sail through a live show. Obviously, technical problems pop up.
Yeah, I think that if you're going to be a live show, that you should be truly live. That scripting is great, but comedy needs to be off the cuff as well. It needs to be reactive as well as proactive. So I think the reason that I've been able to host the Debaters for as long as I have is that I don't know what the comedians are going to say. I have no idea what their arguments are, and I can react in real time for real. So it's in no way is it like a play. We're not doing a 3-person play, and it's not quite fully improvised. It's a little sweet spot in between where the comedians have prepared opening arguments and closing arguments, but if it doesn't go their way, they have to adapt to each other. And, they are butting heads in the middle of the show with the bare knuckle round, and they have not ever rehearsed that. They don't know what they're going to say. And we've had some great comedians at the Just for Laughs Festival. When we have a chance to have non-Canadians that are still great comedians, we have them on. A lot of them have trouble because they're not used to another comedian questioning them in the middle of their own act on stage. So that to me is when the show is at its best, because it's 3 comedians working in real time, which you don't get to see anywhere else. And it's not quite improvised comedy. We can't rely on a scene or it's got to be all words, and it's being sent out to radio. So visual gags are not as good on the radio.
Has the bare knuckle round or that kind, has it ever carried itself off stage? Like, do some of these, comedians, I've known a few comedians over the years, and I like them because they're eccentric and weird and damaged. So
Thank you for that.
And I say that with
He says it
affection,
at the end of the show.
with lots of affection. Does that ever, everything closes down and then you get backstage and it's like, what the heck was that? You SOB.
No, I don't think so. I think that the large majority of the time the comedians are working together. It's the only opportunity we get to do that, be on stage together. So as much as I don't know what they're going to say, they we come to an agreement before whatever's out there is out there. It's like the hockey players shaking hands at the end of a long series. It's done to entertain the crowd, and the more personal it gets, sometimes the funnier it gets. So they'll hopefully they have a chance to touch base and go, hey, please don't do that on the show. So I've never seen it really carry over to bad blood. I will say there are some comedians who actively don't have as much liking for each other as they might, and they'll try a little harder in their debate to win, but they generally don't. No, there's no lawsuits pending.
Okay.
So.
No
To me, that's when the show is really magic. Is that bare knuckle round when you can tell it's a little improvised and they can react off what the other person's said. I just think that the whole show is magic. I love it. One more question before we go. What do you want people to know about the relationship between news and comedy?
Again, I think that it's changing. Both things are changing before our eyes. I guess everything is, but the pace is so quick now that the traditional ways of doing it are not the only ways of doing it. But having said that, we're talking about John Oliver and kind of really doing a deep dive on something. And to me, comedy is at its best, live comedy, when it's however long the set is, you call back to something that happened earlier, you've crafted material that works together, you've interacted with the crowd a little bit so that they are part of the show, because why else do a show for a live audience if you're not going to be in the moment? And to me, the best comedians bring all of that together at the end of a set. They don't forget anything that happened. They incorporate it into their show, and there's a reward at the end for having listened to the whole set and the whole show. So I don't like seeing comedy, air quotes, that is done in a 2-minute splurge with an audience member who doesn't have a microphone, and it's the comedian just making fun of that person. That's not comedy to me, unless that person's touring with the other person. It was set up like 1980s wrestling. Sorry if I just broke that to you guys, the 1980s wrestling. I like a comedian that can craft a great set, leave room for the audience to interact, and bring it all together at the end. So that, for me, that's the kind of comedy that I'm interested in doing and interested in seeing. And there's a few great comedians out there. And you didn't ask this question, but I'm going to answer it anyway. Canadian comedians, pound for pound, are the funniest in the world to me, in the English-speaking world. So, it's great that there's American acts coming through that have had lots of media behind them. But I would like to see more Canadian comedians selling out big venues on their own, not just the American names who we've been told are funny by the media, and we go along with it.
Stupid media.
Stupid media.
What do they know?
Well, that's a good point. That's a good point, that there is a lot of talent, and thankfully your show exists to at least give some of those comedians a national audience.
Yeah, it's a big part of the mandate of the show. We're going to Yellowknife in a couple days, and we'll have people on the show that are based in Yellowknife, and they don't tour throughout Canada, but they can have their comedy heard because of this show, and people will look them up. And if they do get to tour down the road, we can play a small part in opening them up to at least national audiences. And now, with podcasts, thank goodness, going international, like their comedy can be heard throughout the world. So that's a huge benefit of the show to me, is breaking new acts that, again, pound for pound, I'll put Canadian comedians against anybody in a comedy.
And so will I. And listen, if people aren't listening to CBC, The Debaters, you got to correct that, because that show is such a great showcase, and I love it. And Steve, I think you're the top of the charts for all of them. The only time I seen you live was at a I think they were still the Geminis back there. Might have been the Canadian Screen Awards. It was lifestyle night. Anybody who knows me knows that I like to make fun of lifestyle shows because they don't always represent the truth very well. But I didn't come close to what you did that night. My boss had a background in lifestyle, and she did not like how much I was laughing at that. It was good.
I did my job then. Yeah.
You did. This is the point in the show where we promote our books. And Steve, since you're a guest, why don't you talk about your book first?
Well, this is the big week of the year for my book. It's called Dad Up. It's about dadding. It was written during the pandemic when I wasn't able to tour. And I have got 2 young daughters, and our youngest daughter was born just before the pandemic. So there's those insights for old dads of young kids, but I think it works for all dads.
Old dads of young kids. I think that's you, Scott.
Yes, I was
What are
47. I was 47 when my twins were born. So.
Oh yeah, that's up there. Yeah.
And I had a column at the Star called "Late in the Game." It was I ran for 2 years. It was a parenting column about the trials and tribulations. Well, it was about other things. But anyway, yes, I need to get the book. I need to dad up.
And people need to get your book. That's what you think, to learn how to write editorials. And they should also get my pandemic book, all caps, Stories That Justify an Outrageous Hat collection.
I don't have my book, but here's a smiling poop that my daughter drew me.
I can't compete with that.
Nobody can compete with a smiling poop. What is poop if not happy? And also my next book, The Unqualified Hockey Coach, comes out August 15th.
Yeah, I want to see that, man. Cheers.
Well, I can definitely get you a copy. I would be happy to get you one.
Let's do this. We'll do book currencies. I wish the world would work like this.
Yeah, it'd be great. We can have our own book club and invite people to come and buy our books. It'll only be our books. We need a big group. All right, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. We're both big fans. We really appreciate your time and your thoughts. And people, buy his book, Dad Up, and please listen to the
Debaters. You will be a better person for it.
Thanks very much, gents, and keep brothering so well. I like this. I like to see brothers getting along.
We have a third brother, but
we don't let him on the show.
we don't let him anywhere near.
Never coming on.
I understand that too.
We told him we mentioned him on the show, and he didn't like it. So, all right. Thanks for listening, everybody. So long.
Bye.